Okay, great. So everyone is here. We just received the message to get started. So let's call the case of United States versus Kara Bassett. My name is Judge Wasiri. Scoring judges, please look to the 2 buttons on the lower left of your screen and turn off your audio and video, please. And these should remain off until the end of the trial. You should also set your video to hide all non-video participants. This means that the only people on the screen should be the advocates and myself. Now, can the attorneys please make their appearances?
Good morning, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Madeline Levin, and today I represent the United States government. I'm joined by my second chair, Mr. Jackson Cundy. His audio and video will be off throughout today's trial, but he'll be here assisting me with technical matters.
Good morning, Your Honor, members of the jury.
Good morning. The defense?
Hello, Your Honor. My name is Caitlin Rice, and I'm here representing Kara Bassett. I'm here along with my co-counsel, Tristan Harth. He will be helping me off-screen and muted with some of the technical aspects of today's trial.
Good morning. Do we have any housekeeping matters before we go on to openings?
Yes, Your Honor, the people have a few housekeeping matters to address. We'd like to invoke Rules 615 and 603. All witnesses are constructively sequestered, and they've all been constructively sworn.
Any objections?
Yes, Your Honor, we just object that only the defendant is not sequestered.
Your Honor, it's our understanding that the defendant is not testifying in trial today, but that she's constructively present as a party opponent.
It is noted.
Your Honor, we'd also like to note that pursuant to pretrial order 7, exhibits 4 through 33 have already been entered into evidence. They can be referenced at any time.
All right, is that your understanding of it as well?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
And with that, Your Honor, the people are ready to proceed with opening statements.
Great. Anything further from the defense?
Well, Your Honor, we just ask that if there's at any point that you cannot properly hear or see us, that you verbally let us know just so that we can get that worked out for you.
Okay, you both sound great right now.
Thank you.
Okay, we will hear openings from each party. Everyone should make sure that they're in speaker view. That button is in the upper right screen. Attorneys, please remember to mute your audio when the other attorney is speaking. And with that, we'll take it into openings.
Opening statement from the people, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
She wanted control. She killed for it. It's August 18th, 2017. At an elephant park in Tallahassee, Florida, a woman named Kara Bassett stands in front of a locked storage unit. She pulls out her keys, lets herself in, and it's there that she picks up a syringe of carfentanil. It's a drug so dangerous, it's 5,000 times more toxic than heroin. It's a drug she's about to use to murder her husband. Members of the jury, that woman and her husband, Don Clark, owned and lived at an elephant park, a zoo. But Miss Bassett wasn't happy with the way things were being run. She wanted to turn that park into an elephant sanctuary. And her husband was the only person standing in her way. So on August 18th, Miss Bassett creeps into her husband's bedroom where he lays sleeping, injects him with that lethal drug. Kara Bassett watches as her husband dies. And then you'll learn how she tried to cover up her crime. She drove her husband's body to a swamp 2 hours from her home, dragged him and the tranquilizer that killed him into the marsh, then drove another 2 hours back across the state to leave that vehicle empty and abandoned at an airport. A week later, she picks up the phone, calls the police, reports she needs help, her husband is missing, but members of the jury, you'll learn she never wanted her husband to be found. That's why today, the government has charged Kara Bassett with first-degree murder. We have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant caused the death of her husband and that she did so with malice aforethought, meaning she did so intentionally. We're confident we'll meet that burden. Because you'll hear today that the defendant had a motive. You'll hear about a power of attorney. It's a document that offered Miss Bassett full control over her husband's elephant park if he ever disappeared. And just months later, Don Clark was never seen again. And you'll hear from FBI agent Steph Branham. She'll tell you that the defendant had the means to commit the crime. You'll learn about a syringe of carfentanil. It's a drug so dangerous, just a milligram can kill someone. It's a syringe that went missing from the elephant park. And you'll hear we know exactly what the defendant was doing on August 18th. You'll learn about a rare combination of algae found at Big Gum Swamp, where Miss Bassett disposed of her husband's body, the same combination on Miss Bassett's boots, the same combination on the gas pedal of the van. Members of the jury, Kara Bassett wanted control. She killed for it. It's that simple. That's why, at the end of today's trial, I'll ask you to find Kara Bassett guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Levin. Opening from the defense.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Thank you. May it please the court. The Ms. Levin just told you that Ms. Bassett wanted control, that she killed for it. But you can't jump from missing to murdered without proof. Members of the jury, today we are talking about Kara Bassett. She shared a dream of rescuing elephants with her husband, Don Clark. They shared the Tallahassee Elephant Park together and were happily married for 6 years. Now, on the night of August 17th, 2017, Kara kissed her husband goodnight and left him watching television. When she awoke the next morning, Don was gone. She had a text from him. It said, "Going out for a while." She didn't get worried at first. Don often took trips to manage his business. But as time passed and she didn't hear from him, she finally realized she had to call the police. But instead of helping her find her missing husband, the FBI accused her of murder. Now, a few moments ago, Ms. Levin, she told you a story. But it's important that you understand in today's case, the evidence does not support their story. Today, they have the burden, the highest burden in the law. And that burden is to prove that Kara murdered her husband beyond reasonable doubt. In other words, beyond any reasonable alternate explanation. But members of the jury, they will not be able to meet that burden. When the prosecution calls their witness to the stand, you will see one very big problem. A hole in their case big enough for an elephant to walk through. There is no proof Mr. Clark was even murdered. The FBI arrested Kara for a murder without a body. Without a body, Don Clark's fate is still unknown. Without a body, there is no way to prove cause of death. Without a body, there is no way to prove that Dawn was murdered. So when the prosecution makes claims today about syringes and sedatives and how Dawn died, you have to ask yourself, is it reasonable to make these sorts of claims without a body? No, that's reasonable doubt. You learned today that Dawn got a series of suspicious texts and phone calls from Costa Rica on the day he went missing. And the FBI, they never tracked down the person behind those texts. The last person to speak to Dawn Clark, that is reasonable doubt. Finally, they're going to make claims that some allergy on Kara's boots proves she was at Big Gum Swamp. But you'll see today they only tested the swamp. They never tested Kara's property. The allergy they claim proves her guilt. It could have come from her own backyard. Now that is reasonable doubt. You'll see today the police and prosecution rushed to judgment, jumping from missing to murdered without that proof. But I'm confident that you won't do the same. At the end of today's trial, you will find Ms. Bassett guilty. Not guilty. Thank you. Pardon.
Thank you, Ms. Rice. Before the government calls its first witness, I'm going to ask everyone to switch to gallery view. That button is in the upper right of your screen. This will allow you to see the attorneys and the witnesses at the same time. And also, Ms. Levin, when you were giving your opening, the top of your head was cut off. So if you could, step back just a touch or adjust your camera.
Of course, Your Honor.
Okay, and when you're ready, you can call your first witness.
At this time, the government calls Agent Steph Branham to the stand. May I proceed?
You may.
Good morning, Agent Branham.
Good morning.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a senior special agent with the FBI. I've been with them for almost 20 years now.
How are you qualified as an FBI agent?
Well, I completed the FBI Academy back in 2002. I've been working in the Criminal Investigations Division ever since. I have 100 or more investigations under my belts, and most of them have been in the violent crime section.
How are you involved in today's case?
Well, I was the lead agent on the case investigating the disappearance of Mr. Don Clark.
How did that investigation begin?
Well, it began when we received a phone call from Miss Kara Bassett on August 25th of 2017. She was reporting her husband, Don Clark, missing.
According to Miss Bassett, when had Don Clark gone missing?
She said he had disappeared on August 18th of 2017.
Is Don Clark still considered a missing person today?
No, ma'am. August of 2018, he was declared deceased by the state of Florida.
At the conclusion of your investigation, did you make any arrests?
Yes, Your Honor. Yes, we did. We arrested Miss Kara Bassett on homicide charges.
Agent, let's walk through the steps that led to that eventual arrest, beginning with interviews. Did the FBI ever interview the defendant?
Yes, multiple times throughout our investigation.
Did the defendant tell you where she and her husband lived?
Yes, they lived at the Greater Tallahassee Elephant Park.
Did the defendant tell you if she had any conflicts with her husband?
Yes, she said that they used to fight over how the park would be run. She wanted it to be a charity, and he saw it as more of a business operation.
Agent, do you know if there was any way for the defendant to gain control over her husband's property?
Yes, we found a power of attorney document.
Mr. Cundy, could we get Exhibit 15 up for the jury? Agent, is this the power of attorney you just mentioned?
Yes, it is.
Objection, Your Honor, improper foundation.
Your Honor, may I respond to that?
Yes, you may.
Exhibit 15 has already been entered into evidence pursuant to pretrial order 7. We've just laid the foundation that Agent Branham found this document as a part of her investigation, and therefore sufficient foundation has been laid, given that all of the information contained within this document is already on the record.
If I may respond to that, Your Honor.
Yes, you may.
I submit that opposing counsel has not laid how this witness used this document in their investigation. They just brought this document up. They never talked about when they looked at this in their investigation, and that needs to be laid before this is shown.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Yes, you may.
Your Honor, this witness just testified she conducted a year-long investigation, that this was one of the documents she used in that investigation. We're about to explain how this witness used the document to eventually arrest the defendant.
I'm going to overrule the objection. That sounds more like a weight issue rather than an admissibility issue. So it will be, you can proceed, Ms. Levin.
Agent, according to this document, under what circumstances would the defendant gain control over her husband's property?
It laid out two different ways this could happen. First, if a physician determined that Don Clark was unable to handle his own affairs, and second, if Don Clark were to disappear.
Well, let's focus on that second possibility, disappearance. Mr. Cundy, could we get Exhibit 4 up for the jury? Agent, do you recognize this?
Yes, this is a letter that Don Clark's attorney, Mandy Tuminelli, wrote to me to help with our investigation.
Did Mr. Clark's attorney tell you anything about the disappearance clause in the power of attorney?
Yes, she wrote an entire paragraph about that power of attorney document. Turns out a disappearance clause is not standard in a power of attorney document, and the only reason that it was included on Mr. Clark's was that Ms. Bassett requested it be put there.
Agent, let's move now to physical evidence. What physical evidence led to your arrest of the defendant?
Well, there were three main pieces of physical evidence. There was a syringe, actually multiple syringes full of lethal drugs. There was some GPS data, and there was some algae evidence. All of these were crucial to our investigation.
Well, let's walk through those three pieces one by one, beginning with the syringes. Where did you find those?
We found the syringes in a shed on the property at the Greater Tallahassee Elephant Park.
Did the defendant tell you what drug was in those syringes?
Yes, those syringes contain carfentanil. It's an elephant tranquilizer, toxic to humans.
Mr. Cundy, could we get Exhibit 17 up for the jury? Agent, you just told us carfentanil is toxic to humans. Exactly how dangerous is it?
Extremely dangerous, 5,000 times more toxic than heroin. Just a milligram can kill a person.
Agent, do you know if the defendant was aware of the dangers of carfentanil?
Yes, we interviewed her. We asked her if she was aware of that. She laughed and then said that a few drops could kill a man.
Agent, when you searched the elephant park, how many syringes of carfentanil did you find?
We found 23 in total.
Is that the number you were expecting to find?
No, the park kept a logbook. It said there should have been 24.
Agent, let's move now to that second piece of physical evidence you mentioned, the GPS data. Where did you obtain that data from?
We obtained it from records collected by Navistar from Don Clark's Chevrolet van.
And where did you find that van?
We found it at the Carrie Bell Leon Airport in Tallahassee, Florida.
Mr. Cundy, could we get Exhibit 31 up for the jury? These are the GPS records that Agent Branham collected. Agent, looking at that third summary map on the document, could you tell us the route that Don Clark's vehicle took on the night of August 18th?
Yes, so the van left the elephant park a little after 11 o'clock at night, drove over 2 hours to the Big Gum Swamp. It was parked there for about an hour and then drove back to the Caribellion Airport where we ultimately found it.
Did you find any evidence that Don Clark had ever been inside of that vehicle?
Yes, we collected 6 black hairs from the back seat of the van. Our forensics expert matched them to Don Clark.
To be clear, did you find any of Don Clark's hairs on the front seat of that van?
No, we did not.
And what about Kara Bassett? Did you find any evidence that Miss Bassett had been driving that vehicle?
Yes, ma'am. That's where the algae evidence I mentioned comes into play. At the Big Gum Swamp, there are 2 very specific types of algae that are rarely seen together. We found this combination of algae on the mud, on the driver's side of the vehicle, down on the floor. We also found it in mud that was present on a pair of Miss Bassett's boots.
How did you determine that all of these samples were in fact a match?
Like I said, it's an extremely rare combination of algae. Our forensics experts said that even in swamps, it's hard to find these 2 together. So it was a pretty specific sample we were looking at.
Agent, you told us earlier that Don Clark went missing on August 18th. When did you locate Don Clark's vehicle?
We located it on August 25th.
If Don Clark went missing on the 18th, why'd you wait until the 25th to locate the van?
Ma'am, we didn't wait. August 25th is when Kara Bassett first reported her husband missing.
Thank you, Agent Branham. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Cross, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Hello, Agent. Before I begin, can you hear and see me all right?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so I'd like to start by talking about some facts, making sure we have some things straight. So you never found a body, is that correct?
That is correct.
You searched Big Gum Swamp, right?
We did. We tried to follow every single lead.
You brought a full team of FBI agents, right?
Yes, we did. It is a very big swamp, so we wanted to do as much as we could.
But isn't it true? You just talked about GPS records on Direct that showed you exactly where the van went at that swamp. Am I right?
Well, it showed us exactly where in Florida the swamp was located. However, you won't know GPS doesn't get you down to the exact square inch. It just tells you the general area.
So you brought sniffer dogs to this swamp as well, right?
That is correct.
And you didn't find the body, right?
That is also correct. Like I said, 13,000 acres, boggy vegetation, alligators, insects. It's a black hole in there.
Ma'am, I totally understand that you want to explain your answers, but we're in a limited setting, is there any way that you could try to answer as precise as possible?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. So since you never found a body, you never conducted an autopsy, right?
That is correct.
So there is no toxicology report showing carfentanil as something that killed Don Clark, right?
No, ma'am. That is correct, since there is no body.
So you don't have a cause of death for Don Clark.
Well, we investigated it as a homicide. However, there is no autopsy report.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to share something with you at this time. If you wouldn't mind, give me just 1 minute to work this out. Sorry, I'm having some minor technical difficulties. Can you see my screen, Agent?
No, I just see you right now and the gallery view.
Give me 1 minute. Can you see my screen now, Agent?
Yes, I see an excerpt from Exhibit 5.
Thank you. Okay, so I want to talk about that forensics report that you were talking about on Direct. Isn't it true You said that these samples definitively matched Cara to Big Gum Swamp, right?
Yes, it's an extremely rare algae combo.
But isn't it true that your forensic expert said that this is not certain?
I mean, there's no absolute certainty. Just like with fingerprints, it's only a percent of possibility match, but it was a very, very strong match.
Ma'am, please, yes or no? Back to my question, is that a yes?
That's a yes, you read that correctly. However, later on in the report, it says highly likely.
Your Honor, I ask at this time that the latter portion of that answer be stricken as non-responsive.
It'll be stricken.
Thank you. Now, isn't it true that this report also says that those algae samples can be transferred by contact and remain on surfaces for months?
That is correct.
All right, so I want to talk about some of the, you talked about some carfentanil and some logbooks on direct.
Yes, I did.
Now I want to look at that logbook a little bit closer. So this is the logbook that you were talking about on direct, right?
Yes, it is.
And if we look at the administrator column, these are workers at the park for the most part, right? You recognize these people?
Yes, they all signed with initials.
So CC is Kara Clark
That's correct.
and KS is Kelsey Stebbins?
Oh, sorry.
And KS is Kelsey Stebbins?
That is correct.
Who is PISP-STP?
We were never able to track down anyone with that exact combination of initials. However, since it was back from 2016, we didn't find it overly relevant.
So let me be clear, you don't know who this is?
No, we do not.
So you don't have an interview for this person, right?
No, again, they only used it back in 2016.
Your Honor, again, I ask that the latter portion be stricken as non-responsive.
Your Honor, may I respond to that?
Go ahead.
Your Honor, this witness is simply clarifying her answer. She wasn't trying to waste time or in any way divert from what opposing counsel was trying to elicit. She was merely explaining the reason she didn't get an interview was because of this fact that the last time this person had used the syringes was in 2016.
If I may respond to that, Your Honor?
You may.
I submit that the witness has already made this point on a previous answer, and repeating that now is not necessary.
I agree with the defense. So your objection is sustained. It'll be stricken. And if you want this witness to explain further, you can do that on redirect.
Of course, Your Honor.
And agent, you don't have an alibi for this PISP-STP.
No, we do not.
All right, so now I want to move on to some text messages that Clark received and sent on the day he went missing. So I want to start here. So at around 2:32, isn't it true that Mr. Clark sent a text to Kara and it says, "I want to talk to you about a trip to Costa Rica."
That's correct.
And isn't it true that in your interviews she believed that to mean Costa Rica?
Yes, that's what she told us.
And isn't it true she responded with, "Okay, I'm fine with that. With whatever, just want you to be happy, love you, heart emoji." That's accurate, right?
Yes, it is.
Now I want to look a little bit later on that same day. Now, Mr. Clark received 2 text messages from an unlisted number in Costa Rica. I'm reading that correctly, right?
He did, that's correct.
Now the texts, they translate to "call me immediately," right?
Correct.
And now let's take a look at his phone records. It's true that he did call that person immediately, right?
Yes, he did.
For 52 minutes.
Yes, that's what the record shows.
And just to be clear, you never were able to track down the person that this phone number belonged to. Am I accurate with that information?
That is correct. We tried to work with the police already in Costa Rica.
All right, thank you. I just want to look at one more thing about text messages. So this is a text that Don sent to Kara on that same day at 11:14 p.m. That's right, right?
That's correct.
The truth says going out for a while?
That's what it says.
Thank you. No further questions.
Redirect, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Agent, on cross-examination, opposing counsel asked you some questions about a logbook. Now, I want to talk about one of those individuals on the logbook. Why didn't you find it relevant to your investigation that you never found the person who used the logbook in 2016?
Well, this person only used the logbook once, and they used it. The last time they used it was about 2 years before our investigation even began. Meanwhile, Ms. Bassett and several other employees at the park had been using it all throughout 2017, leading up to Don Clark's disappearance.
Opposing counsel also asked you a few questions about Costa Rica. Did you find that Don Clark had a plane?
Yes, we did, at the Caribel Leon Airport.
Was that plane ever in Costa Rica?
Not from what we could tell. When we located the plane, it was still in its hangar in Florida.
Thank you, Agent Branham. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right.
Brief recross, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
You don't have alibis for either Kelsey Stebbins or Nate Garrison that show that they used in 2017, right?
No, we don't have alibis for them. We interviewed them both, though, and found no motive for either.
No further questions.
At this time, may this witness be excused?
She may.
And with that, the government rests.
Does the defense have any witnesses it would like to call?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Joe Young to the stand. Mr. Young, can you see and hear me all right?
I can see you fine, ma'am. Thank you.
Awesome. May I proceed?
You may.
Thank you. Please introduce yourself to the court.
Good morning, y'all. My name is Joe Young. I'm a TV producer.
How did you get into TV producing?
Well, my first gig was with a show called How It's Made. I stayed there for around 11 or so years before switching into documentary work.
Why did you quit now How It's Made?
Well, there's a saying where I'm from. Laws are kind of like sausages. It's best not to see them being made. And for me, that became true of everything that show went over. So eventually I had to have a career change, and I went over to documentary filmmaking. That's actually how I met Kara Bassett.
I understand exactly what you mean, Mr. Young. So I want to talk about what we're talking about here today in court. When did you start working with Kara Bassett?
I started working with Kara in 2015. I was filming a documentary for her. I wanted to call it, being a fan of, literal TV show titles, How It's Made. I wanted to call it Woman Who Runs an Elephant Park. She wanted to call it Elephant Queen, and the studio chose that name.
So what were your working hours while filming for that documentary?
My working hours were pretty tough, 5 days a week from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day.
Do you mind giving us some examples of the types of things that you would film?
Of course. I filmed everything from elephants to staff to guests, even Don Clark, but mostly the documentary was about Kara Bassett.
Now, how would you describe Don Clark to the best of your knowledge?
Well, when it came to business, Don Clark was all business. But after hours, he loved to party. He loved to travel. His favorite spot was Costa Rica.
Now, how would you describe Kara Bassett?
I think, go ahead.
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of foundation as to how this witness knew that Don Clark's favorite spot to travel to was Costa Rica.
Response?
Your Honor, I submit we have laid the proper foundation as to this witness's knowledge. We've explained how this witness has worked at the park since 2015, has had working hours from the opening to the park till after it's closed, and that this witness has 2,000 hours of documentary footage. We submit that that foundation has been laid. This witness can give this testimony.
Your Honor, may I respond to that?
You may.
It's true that opposing counsel has elicited the general knowledge that Mr. Young had of Don Clark, of Don Clark's character, for example, but he doesn't have enough, or there's not enough foundation laid for how this witness knew where Don Clark would go visit specifically. There haven't been any conversations elicited in which that was brought up, and we ask that that foundation be laid before Mr. Young can testify to Costa Rica specifically.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
You may.
I submit this goes to its weight, not its admissibility.
Are you able to lay that foundation?
Well, yes, Your Honor, we will lay that foundation, but I submit that we have shown how this witness knows this kind of information, but we can try to lay a little bit more.
It's the objection sustained until that foundation can be laid.
Mr. Young,
Until that foundation is in fact laid.
It's stricken until the foundation's laid.
Mr. Young, you just discussed that you filmed all types of things at the park, including Mr. Clark. Did you ever have any personal conversations with Mr. Clark?
I did. I got pretty close with both Kara and Don over the years, and we had several different conversations at many different times.
So did you ever speak about have any personal conversations?
Yes, we did.
Did these involve travel in Costa Rica?
Yeah, when I talked with Don, he would often talk about going down to Costa Rica. That's how I know that was his favorite spot.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
Response?
Your Honor, I submit that this is not hearsay. We're saying this witness believe this goes to this witness's state of mind. We're not trying to say that this is Mr. Clark's favorite spot, but that this is what this witness believes.
Your Honor, may I respond to that?
You may.
Opposing counsel just elicited a statement of Don Clark's that he frequently went to Costa Rica. For the truth of the matter, it also doesn't go to his state of mind. It doesn't talk about his mental or physical state. It's merely a fact, and they're offering it for the truth of the matter. Therefore, it's inadmissible hearsay.
Do you have a response, Ms. Rice?
Well, once again, Your Honor, I submit we did not elicit a statement, and that it is not going to the truth. This is what this witness believes, and he can only testify to his own knowledge. And we submit that is exactly what he's doing. There is no statement here.
May I respond to that, Your Honor?
You may.
Pursuant to Your Honor's last ruling, opposing counsel was asked to lay more foundation for how this witness knew that Don Clark actually went to Costa Rica. She then did elicit a statement of Don Clark's that he frequently went to Costa Rica to lay that foundation. That statement is being offered for the truth, and it's hearsay.
Go ahead, Ms. Rice.
I submit that we have not elicited a statement. I think opposing counsel is a little inaccurate in that. We laid the foundation as to how this witness knew Don Clark and what Don Clark's interests were. And that involved him being interested in Costa Rica. We did not say that he traveled to Costa Rica or that he loved Costa Rica at this time.
I tend to agree with the prosecution here. It seems like the only way this witness would know that is based on hearsay. And since you're using it for the truth rather than any effect it had on this witness, it's inadmissible at this time.
Motion to strike.
It's stricken.
All right, Mr. Young, how would you describe Mr. Clark and Kara's relationship?
Well, they had two kinds of relationships, a business one and a personal one. But on both ends, to me, it looked fairly good. They had a tender marriage, and from what I saw, they never gotten into physical altercations.
I'd like to draw your attention to August 18th of 2017. Where were you at 6 p.m. that day?
At 6 p.m., I believe I was sitting at a table with Don Clark.
Now, I'd like to direct your attention to exhibit. Let me pull that up really quickly. These are Don's text messages. I just want to draw your attention to lines 7 and 8. What time were those received?
It looked from these logs like 6 p.m.
So, Mr. Young, did you notice anything about Mr. Clark's behavior at that time that you deemed significant?
I did. The color, it drained right out of Don's face. His face turned completely white.
Now, what do you know about Don's dealings in Costa Rica?
I know that he has some business there, but it's sort of on the down low. He likes to keep it hush-hush.
All right.
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of foundation as to how this witness would know that.
If I may respond, Your Honor?
You may.
I submit that we did lay this foundation. We talked about Mr. Young's filming of Mr. Clark and his personal conversations, how they discussed all types of things, including business and personal situations. So I submit that we have laid the foundation for this knowledge.
Your Honor, again, if the foundation that they're using is through personal conversations, that foundation lies in admissible hearsay.
If I may respond to that, Your Honor.
You may.
There is no specific statement which we are referring to. There's no statements of hearsay in this witness's response.
May I respond to that, Your Honor?
Go ahead.
There's two possibilities here. Either opposing counsel is eliciting a statement or eliciting testimony without the proper foundation that Don Clark had business dealings in Costa Rica, or opposing counsel is eliciting a hearsay statement that's inadmissible.
So to get this straight here, Ms. Levin, you're saying that there's a lack of foundation and that the foundation is based in hearsay.
Exactly, Your Honor.
Do you have a final response to that, Ms. Rice?
Well, Your Honor, once again, I submit we have laid this foundation. We've talked about Mr. Young and Mr. Clark's personal conversations and how they have discussed this in the past. And when it comes to hearsay, hearsay has to be a specific statement. There is no statement being elicited in this response. This is not hearsay. This is his own witness's knowledge, and that is all this witness is testifying to.
But isn't the knowledge based on the conversations?
Well, Your Honor, this witness's knowledge can only testify to its knowledge. If it was a hearsay, a conversation that had with the defendant, then the defendant is not here to be able to talk about that. And further, this isn't based on, it's his own opinion.
Your Honor,
I'm going to sustain the objection.
motion to strike.
Stricken.
All right, I'm going to move on, Mr. Young. While you were filming at the park, did you ever see anyone access the shed where the syringes were kept?
I did. I think about a dozen or so workers had access to that storage unit.
Now, Mr. Young, how many hours of footage do you have for your time filming at the park?
A lot. I think around 2,000 hours.
And how much of that to the FBI view?
Zero. Zilch. It was a little bit of a surprise to me, actually.
Your Honor, at this time, I have no further questions.
Cross-examination.
Go ahead.
Mr. Young, I want to start with something you talked about on direct examination. You told us that the defendant and her husband had never gotten into any physical altercations. Is that right?
Yes, I never saw Kara hurt her husband or Don hurt his wife.
You actually specifically said the word physical altercations, right?
Yes, I believe so.
Mr. Young, that's actually not true, is it?
I would disagree with you. I never saw Don hurt Kara or Kara hurt Don.
Mr. Young, you're aware of an instance in which the defendant threw a vase at her husband's head, right?
That is true, but it missed. And again, I never saw Kara hurt Don.
That's a yes, that she did in fact throw a vase at her husband's head. Yes or no?
Yes, that is correct.
Mr. Young, I want to talk a little bit more about that. You're aware that the defendant and her husband fought multiple times over how the elephant park should be run, right?
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
May I respond to that, Your Honor?
You may.
Your Honor, in this case, no statements have been elicited. I'm merely speaking about what the general fights were about. Furthermore, Your Honor, the defendant was one of the people speaking in these fights. Any of her statements would fall under 801D2, admission by party opponent. Therefore, this witness has sufficient knowledge to talk about what the fights were about generally.
If I may respond to that, Your Honor.
You may.
Well, I submit that this is the exact same argument that we just made on my direct of this witness. And any knowledge that this witness would have would be based on Don Clark's statements can't come in because any of his knowledge would be based on hearsay. So I admit this can't come in.
I agree with the defense. Subject to Kara Bassett's statements, which would fall under the exemption, any of Don Clark's statements will not be admitted.
Of course. Mr. Young, the defendant told you she wanted to turn the elephant park into an elephant sanctuary, right?
That is correct, yes.
And as far as you saw, Mr. Clark never did anything to make that happen.
Yes, that is also correct.
Mr. Young, could you pull up Exhibit 38 from your digital binder?
All right, I see it.
This is an interview you took of the defendant in June of 2017, true?
Yes, I remember this one. I made a comment about how we never got to do a how it's made about her hair.
As far as you know, this hasn't been altered in any way since that interview.
No, it looks authentic.
At this time, we offer Exhibit 38 into evidence.
Well, Your Honor, I object. If I may refer to 801D2, this statement is one of the party manifested that is adopted or believed to be true. If I may explain that in layman's terms, it is unclear if Ms. Bassett believed these statements to actually be true. These were made for a television show, and she had motivation to be dramatic and exaggerate for television purposes and ratings. So I submit we cannot rely on this information to be accurate.
May I respond to that?
You may.
Under 801, a party opponent's statements are admissible. This interview is solely of Kara Bassett. All of her statements are admissible, regardless of whether or not they are in fact true. None of the defendant's statements are hearsay because of 801D2. Opposing counsel's argument goes to the weight, not the admissibility of this evidence.
Well, Your Honor, if I may respond to that?
You may.
I'd like to specifically reference 801D2B, which says that statements of the party that could not be true should be excluded. And I submit this falls under that particular bullet point. Once again, it is unclear if Ms. Bassett believed these to be true at the time they were filmed. So these do not fall under 801D2.
I'm going to overrule the objection and the exhibit can come in.
Mr. Cundy, can we get Exhibit 38 up for the jury? And could we play that now for the jury?
People look at me and they think I'm sweet and nice. Go on. Keep underestimating me. I will lobby senators. I will protest big businesses. I will get in your face. I will take people to their grave if I have to. I will do anything to protect these elephants.
Your Honor, may I ask if you were able to hear that?
I was able to hear it just fine.
Perfect. Mr. Young, you just heard the defendant say she would do anything to protect the elephants, right?
That is what she said at the end of the clip, yes.
Now, Mr. Young, I want to talk about the events following Mr. Clark's disappearance. Mr. Cundy, could we get Exhibit 22 up for the jury? These are Kara Bassett's phone records, right?
That is what these look like, yes.
You were presented with these records during an interview.
I was, yes.
So you're aware the defendant didn't call her husband after August 18th, true?
Yes, that is correct.
You're aware the defendant didn't text her husband after August 18th.
That is what it looks like from these phone records.
You're also aware the defendant waited 7 days following the 18th to call the police, right?
Yes, that is what it appears.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about the defendant's emotional response to her husband's disappearance. You got back from your trip to Mexico on August 26th, right?
Yes, the day after the FBI began their investigation.
You observed the defendant's behavior in the weeks that followed.
Yes.
Mr. Young, you thought the defendant seemed devastated following her husband's disappearance.
I did. I never seen Kara Bassett like that before. She was completely torn up.
She was devastated for about a week, right, Mr. Young?
That's when it was at its worst, yes.
A week from August 26th is approximately September 3rd, right?
That is correct, yes, ma'am.
Mr. Young, isn't September 3rd the day the FBI left the Elephant Park?
I believe so, yes.
So, Mr. Young, what you're telling us is that the defendant stopped seeming so devastated following her husband's disappearance at around the same time the FBI left her home.
I wouldn't call it completely fine, but she became less devastated then. Yes, that is correct, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Nothing further.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor, brief redirect. Now, if you just give me a minute to pull this document up.
Pardon me, ma'am.
No worries. Can you see my screen all right?
Yes, ma'am, I can.
All right, let's take a look at these text messages. I want to direct your attention to line 4. It's a response that Kara sent to Don, back to Don's phone. Do you mind reading that for the jury?
Yes, I have to enlarge my screen a little bit. Okay, but I'm fine with whatever. Just want you to be happy. Love you, heart emoji.
No further questions at this time.
No recross, Your Honor.
All right. You may be excused.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, we will now hear closing arguments from both sides. Everyone should please switch back to speaker view. And also, since both witnesses have testified, you can complete the witness portion of your ballot.
Closing
Okay, and we're
argument.
going to go ahead.
She wanted control. She killed for it. On August 18th, 2017, the defendant crept up on her sleeping husband, injected him with a lethal drug. She killed him. It's that simple. Members of the jury, you were presented with a lot of evidence throughout today's trial, but one thing was repeated over and over by both the government and the defense, by both witnesses. Above all else, the defendant wanted control. And you heard how she took a concrete step to get it. She signed a power of attorney, a document that offered her full access, full control over her husband's elephant park. In the case that her husband ever disappeared, members of the jury, you learned that disappearance clause isn't standard. It's highly irregular. The only reason that clause was included was because the defendant insisted on it. That's motive. And you heard about the overwhelming physical evidence that ties the defendant to the crime. You heard about a syringe of carfentanil. It's a drug so dangerous, it's 5,000 times more toxic than heroin. It's a drug Agent Branham asked the defendant about. The defendant laughed. She said a few drops can kill someone, and she was right about that. And we know the defendant put that knowledge to use. Because you heard that when Don Clark went missing, a syringe of carfentanil went missing with him. Members of the jury, that is not a coincidence. And we know exactly what the defendant did when she used that knowledge. You heard how after killing her husband, she drove his body to Big Gum Swamp. You heard we have algae evidence to prove that drive happened. You learned about a rare combination of algae. Algae found at Big Gum Swamp, the same combination on Miss Bassett's boots, the same combination on the gas pedal of that van. The members of the jury, it's true. Agent Branham didn't collect a sample of algae from the elephant park. But I want to be very clear about this forensic evidence. Agent Branham provided his forensic experts with samples of algae. Her forensic expert had enough information to conclude that this wasn't one type of algae. This was two types combined in all three locations. Members of the jury, that's not a coincidence, that's forensic proof. And if you still have doubt, I urge you to consider the defendant's response to her husband's disappearance. Members of the jury, her husband of 6 years had just disappeared. What does she do? We heard she didn't call her husband, didn't text her husband. Why? Because she knew he wouldn't respond. The defendant waited 7 days to call the police to report her husband missing. Why? Because she already knew where he was. The defendant seemed devastated following her husband's disappearance for about a week. Why a week? Well, Mr. Young, the defense's own witness, told you Miss Bassett stopped seeming so devastated about her husband's disappearance at around the same time the FBI left her home. Why? Because that devastation was an act, members of the jury, an act the defendant stopped the second she was no longer being watched. Members of the jury, in a few moments, defense counsel is going to get up here and they're going to tell you there are other reasonable possibilities for how Don Clark disappeared. I want to consider those possibilities. They talk to you a little bit about Costa Rica, about phone calls Don Clark made to individuals in Costa Rica. But members of the jury, it's not possible that Don Clark went to Costa Rica on August 18th. Because I asked Agent Branham, did Don Clark have a plane? She said yes, but that plane isn't in Costa Rica. It was still at the airport. It never left Florida because Don Clark never left Florida. Defense counsel might tell you it's possible park employees are responsible for Don Clark's disappearance, but Agent Branham interviewed every single employee. She interviewed every single one and found no motive for any of them to kill their employer. Members of the jury, it was the defendant who wanted control and killed for it. It's not a coincidence. The defendant waited 7 days to call the police. It's not a coincidence. There is forensic proof tying her to the crime. There is no coincidence because that kind of evidence doesn't pile up against innocent people. The defendant is not innocent. Members of the jury, we have the burden. I'm not suggesting that we don't. But we don't have to eliminate all doubt. We only have to eliminate reasonable doubt. So when defense counsel asks you to consider other possibilities, you have to ask yourselves, are those possibilities reasonable? Or are they just an extension of the defendant's cover-up? confident they are. It was the defendant who wanted control and killed for it. She's responsible. Find her guilty. Thank you.
Defense?
Yes, Your Honor. Before I begin, I would just like to say that my second chair was having some technical difficulties, and I'd like to thank the court for their patience with my evidence and my delays.
That's no problem.
Thank you. May I proceed?
You may.
May it please the court. She wanted control, so she killed for it? That's a leap that Ms. Levin just can't make. She played hopscotch with the evidence, jumping from points to points, attempting to convince you to land on murder. Ms. Levin jumped from missing to murdered without the proof. On August 18th, 2017, Kara went to bed and woke up and find her husband gone. Kara had no reason to believe her husband when he texted her that he was going out for a while. I mean, you saw texts today in court that showed that just that previous day, Don Clark had been discussing taking a trip to Costa Rica. Now, some time passed, and Kara started to realize that something might be wrong. So she called the police. And she put her trust in them and cooperated fully. But the FBI, they failed Kara. Their investigation was so cursory, so sloppy, that by the time they were done, all they had was a missing persons case that was full of holes. So what did they do? They jumped over those holes and landed at murder. And they cast Kara Bassett as their culprit. But members of the jury, that is not how this justice system works. As I explained to you at the beginning of today's trial, the prosecution can't just point fingers and make accusations. Today, they had the highest burden in the law. And that burden was to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Kara murdered her husband. But every hole in their case was big enough for their entire case to fall into. Every hole they jumped over is reasonable doubt. So let's take a look at those holes. They jumped from a missing syringe to a murder weapon. It's their story that Kara took a syringe and injected Mr. Clark with a lethal substance, but where is their proof? You saw a log today that shows a missing syringe, but we showed you today that at least 12 people had access to that syringe, those syringes. Now, despite Ms. Levin's claims just now in her closing, the FBI didn't interview all of them. You saw today that there was a person on that administrator's list that the agent didn't even know. Agent Branham couldn't tell you today where that person was on the day of the murder. Their name, that is reasonable doubt. Then they claimed wholly without evidence that Kara injected Mr. Clark. But once again, where is the proof? They don't have a body. No autopsy, no toxicology report, no cause of death. No proof of any harm to him whatsoever. They just jumped from a missing syringe to a murder weapon. But this is reasonable doubt. Then they jumped from algae to an arrest. Today, they claimed that algae on Ms. Bassett's boots and van pedals came from Big Gum Swamp, but they made that leap without ever testing Ms. Bassett's own park or any other locations in the state of Florida. You saw today that in that forensics report, they can't be certain that those are a direct match, and that samples of algae can stay for months at a time and be transferred. That is reasonable doubt. Ms. Levin admitted the FBI never tested the Tallahassee Elephant Park, and she admitted that there are acres of muddy Florida property. They needed to test the muddy land and ponds of Kara's own park to see if it grew in her own backyard, but they didn't. The algae evidence is equally consistent with Kara walking around her own park. From algae to arrest, but without that evidence in between, that's a hole in their case that they just jumped over. And that's reasonable doubt. What is the more reasonable explanation? The one that the FBI ignored. Don Clark had shady business deals in Costa Rica. Clark spoke to his lawyer about moving money around off the books, as you saw today when Ms. Levin put those documents up on screen. What was Don Clark so scared of? Did Clark plan a meeting that night at Big Gum Swamp? You saw those text messages and mysterious phone calls from Costa Rica, and you heard that Agent Branham never figured out who that person was. Is it reasonable to believe that maybe Don Clark drove his own van to Big Gum Swamp and met some people? Yes. That is reasonable doubt on the prosecution's claim. We will never know a lot of the information that the prosecution claimed was so solid because the FBI just didn't check. We'll never know because the FBI focused on Kara instead. We will never know. That is reasonable doubt. Members of the jury, opposing counsel is going to get up here again in a moment and try to convince you that these holes don't exist or that they don't matter, but it is your job to hold them to their burden. It is your job to make sure opposing counsel does her job. They haven't met their burden beyond a reasonable doubt. Find Ms. Bassett not guilty. Thank you.
Rebuttal, Your Honor?
Go ahead.
One entry from a logbook in 2016 isn't reasonable doubt. One phone call with someone in Costa Rica isn't reasonable doubt. Employees with no motive aren't reasonable doubt. Members of the jury, you have a responsibility to look at the totality of the evidence in today's case. The totality of the evidence offers one reasonable conclusion. Kara Bassett wanted control. She killed for it. Find her guilty. Thank you.
All right. Judges, you should please complete your ballots and then click submit when you're done. And I'll ask everyone to stay on until everyone has submitted their ballots, and then we'll do some brief comments.